At exactly 6 a.m., the conference room was completely empty. But 6 minutes later, a single-father billionaire would leave his entire executive team speechless with one sentence about his daughter. High above the rain-soaked city, the lights on the 42nd floor were already on while most people were still asleep behind closed curtains. William Cole sat alone in his office, staring at a cold cup of coffee and a framed picture of his little girl smiling with crooked ponytails and missing front teeth. The world called William a ruthless business genius. The media described him as one of the most feared billionaires on Wall Street, but nobody saw the years he spent sleeping in his car just to afford his daughter's medical treatment for severe asthma attacks. He built his company from a tiny rented storage room, with nothing but an old second-hand computer and impossible determination. During the hardest nights of his life, William would answer investor calls while reheating leftover pasta for his daughter after school. And those painful years taught him one thing he would never forget. People who struggle to survive cannot afford irresponsibility. That was why he hated disrespect more than failure itself. This morning, William had called a leadership meeting with 6 senior executives. The meeting wasn't about profits. It wasn't about expansion. It was about a decision that could destroy the lives of hundreds of ordinary employees. But when the clock struck 6, not a single executive was there. William glanced at his watch one last time as rain slid slowly down the glass windows behind him. He had no idea that just a few minutes later, the most painful memory of his life would force everyone in that room to understand why 6 minutes can change everything forever. Before this story ends, one billionaire will make a decision that changes hundreds of lives forever. And it all started because his executives were just 6 minutes late. Stay until the end, because the reason behind William's reaction is something nobody in that room saw coming. What happened next didn't just shock the executives. It revealed the painful secret that built William into the man he became. At 6 a.m., the executives finally entered the conference room laughing among themselves, carrying fresh coffees and barely noticing the silence waiting for them inside. One of them loosened his tie and smiled casually. "Morning, William." Traffic was terrible. Another executive chuckled as he pulled out his chair. "You're here before sunrise again?" But nobody else laughed. William Cole remained seated at the end of the long glass table, his cold coffee untouched beside him. Rain slid slowly down the windows behind his chair, while the city below was just beginning to wake up. For several seconds, William said nothing. Then he quietly closed the file in front of him. The soft sound echoed through the room harder than shouting ever could. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. Something felt wrong. The meeting atmosphere had already changed before they even arrived. William slowly stood and looked at each face around the table, one by one. "I asked all of you to be here at exactly 6 o'clock, he said calmly. "Because today wasn't supposed to be about profits." His voice remained controlled, but the weight behind every word made the room completely still. It was supposed to be about responsibility. Nobody interrupted him. Because for the first time that morning, they realized their billionaire CEO wasn't angry about a few lost minutes. He looked genuinely disappointed in the kind of people they had become. One of the executives finally cleared his throat, trying to ease the tension building inside the room. "William, with respect, we're only a few minutes late." The moment those words left his mouth, the atmosphere turned ice cold. William Cole slowly walked toward the rain-covered windows overlooking the city skyline. His hands rested quietly behind his back, as if he was fighting memories nobody else in that room could see. "A few minutes," William repeated softly. Then he looked down at the streets, far below. "When my daughter was 7 years old, she stopped breathing during an asthma attack." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The ambulance arrived 6 minutes late. The room went completely silent. Even the sound of rain against the glass suddenly felt louder. William's voice remained calm, but the pain behind it was impossible to hide. "I remember sitting beside her hospital bed all night, thinking about how strange life is. he said quietly. For some people, 6 minutes means nothing. For others, it can become the longest 6 minutes of their entire life. Several executives lowered their eyes. For the first time, they weren't looking at a billionaire CEO. They were looking at a father who had once been terrified of losing the only person he loved most in the world. William turned back toward the table. You think this meeting is about punctuality, he continued. It's not. His jaw tightened slightly. It's about character, responsibility, and whether the people leading this company still remember how ordinary people survive. At that moment, nobody in the room could deny the truth anymore. William's discipline was never created by success. It was created by fear, poverty, and the painful memories he could never escape. The truth was, this meeting had never been scheduled by accident. For the past week, William Cole had carefully watched every executive sitting around that table. During the previous board meeting, one proposal changed the way he saw his leadership team forever. An executive named Martin Reeves suggested laying off hundreds of lower-level employees to protect executive performance bonuses before the end of the financial quarter. What disturbed William most wasn't the proposal itself. It was the reaction around the room. Some executives nodded without hesitation. Others stayed silent and avoided eye contact, pretending the conversation wasn't happening. Not one person asked what would happen to the employees losing their jobs. Not one person mentioned the families depending on those paychecks to survive. William said almost nothing during that meeting. He simply listened, observed, remembered. That was why he scheduled this meeting for exactly 6 a.m. It wasn't only about testing punctuality. He wanted to see who still respected responsibility when comfort was taken away. Who would show discipline without being forced? And most importantly, who still remembered the people at the bottom of the company, keeping the entire business alive every single day. Because before William made his final decision, he needed to know whether his executives still deserved to lead anyone at all. At exactly 6 a.m., the conference room remained completely empty. William Cole sat alone at the long glass table while rain rolled slowly down the windows behind him. The city outside was beginning to wake up, but inside the room, the silence felt heavy enough to stop time itself. William glanced once at his watch. 6:02. Still nobody arrived. No messages, no apologies. A few moments later, his assistant stepped quietly into the room and hesitated before speaking. Sir, they said the meeting was too early. They're on the way. Too early. Those two words settled heavily in William's mind. Years ago, he had worked multiple jobs while sleeping inside his car because every dollar went toward his daughter's medical bills. Back then, too early was a luxury struggling people could never afford. Then, at 6 a.m., the executives finally entered the room laughing among themselves, holding expensive coffees and speaking casually, as if nothing had happened. Morning, William. Traffic was terrible, one of them joked. Another smiled while taking his seat. You're here before sunrise again? But William didn't smile back. In that moment, he realized something deeply disappointing. The people leading his company had become so comfortable with power and privilege that they no longer understood the discipline ordinary workers needed just to survive every single day. One of the executives finally tried to defend himself. William, with all due respect, we're only 6 minutes late. The moment he said those words, William Cole slowly turned toward the rain-covered windows behind him. His expression remained calm, but something in his eyes suddenly changed. A few minutes, William repeated quietly. Then he took a slow breath. When my daughter was 7 years old, she stopped breathing during a severe asthma attack. The room instantly fell silent. I remember carrying her to the hospital entrance while she struggled to breathe in my arms, he continued. And the ambulance arrived 6 minutes late. Nobody moved. Nobody even touched their coffee anymore. William kept his eyes on the city below. That night, I sat beside her hospital bed wondering how 6 minutes could feel so endless. His voice remained controlled, but the pain behind every word filled the room. For some people, 6 minutes means nothing, he said softly. But for someone terrified of losing the person they love most, 6 minutes can change their entire life forever. The executives lowered their eyes in silence, and for the first time that morning, they finally understood this meeting was never really about being late. It was about responsibility, empathy, and the kind of people they had become. William Cole slowly walked back toward the conference table and looked directly at every executive sitting in front of him. "You think this meeting is about punctuality?" he said calmly. "It's not." Nobody interrupted him. William placed both hands on the table as rain continued tapping softly against the glass walls around them. "This company is starting to lose its soul," he continued. "And the worst part is, some of you don't even realize it anymore." Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. William's eyes stopped on Martin Reeves. "Last week, some of you suggested laying off hundreds of employees just to protect executive bonuses." The room went silent again. "People with families," William said firmly. "People working 2 jobs. People waking up before sunrise every single day because they cannot afford to fail." Martin finally tried to respond. "We were thinking about shareholder expectations." William immediately shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "You were thinking about comfort." That sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. For years, the executives believed William demanded impossible discipline because success came naturally to him. They saw the billionaire, but never the frightened father who once counted every dollar before buying medicine for his daughter. William slowly looked around the room again. "Ordinary people don't have the luxury of irresponsibility," he continued. "If they arrive late, they lose wages. If they lose wages, they miss rent. If they miss rent, they lose their homes." Nobody dared to speak anymore. "You sit in this building making decisions that affect thousands of lives," William said. "And somehow you've forgotten what survival actually looks like." The disappointment in his voice felt heavier than anger. Because at that moment, William realized the real danger facing his company wasn't financial loss. It was leadership that no longer understood the value of human dignity. The room remained completely silent as William Cole slowly opened the folder, lying on the conference table in front of him. Then, without raising his voice, he slid 6 identical folders across the polished surface toward the executives. "I reviewed every executive compensation package last night," William said calmly. Several faces immediately stiffened. "Effective immediately, all senior leadership bonuses are suspended." For a moment, nobody reacted. It was as if the words themselves were too shocking to process. Then Martin leaned forward in disbelief. "You can't be serious." William looked directly at him. "I'm completely serious." The rain outside grew heavier, filling the silence between them. "The layoff proposal is canceled," William continued. "Not a single lower-level employee will lose their job to protect executive comfort." One executive shook his head slowly. "Do you understand how much money this will cost the company?" William's expression never changed. "No," he replied quietly. "I understand how much it would cost families if we did nothing." Nobody had an answer for that. William closed the final folder and rested his hands on the table. "The money from those bonuses," he continued, "will be redirected into employee retention, emergency support, and healthcare assistance for lower-level staff." Several executives stared at him in stunned silence. For years, they believed leadership meant protecting profits above everything else. But William had built his company differently. He built it beside exhausted employees working overtime, single parents struggling to survive, and workers who still showed up every morning no matter how difficult life became. "I built this company with people who showed loyalty, discipline, and dignity," William said firmly. "If leadership can't do the same, then leadership changes." And at that moment, every person in the room realized the billionaire they feared most was also the only one willing to protect the people nobody else noticed. The conference room remained frozen in silence long after William Cole finished speaking. Outside the glass windows, the rain continued falling over the city, but inside that room, something far more important had changed. For the first time in years, the executives finally understood what William had been trying to say from the very beginning. He was never truly angry because they arrived 6 minutes late. He was disappointed because they had forgotten what life feels like for ordinary people. People who wake up before sunrise to catch buses to work. People who cannot afford medical bills. People who work overtime while pretending everything is fine at home. People whose entire lives can collapse because of one missed paycheck. William slowly looked around the table one last time. If leadership stops respecting people, he said quietly, then leadership must change. Nobody argued anymore. Nobody defended themselves. Because deep down, every person in that room knew he was right. They had become so comfortable with power, bonuses, and expensive offices that they no longer recognized the struggles of the very employees who built the company beneath them. And in that moment, William reminded them that true leadership is not measured by wealth, titles, or control. It is measured by responsibility, sacrifice, and the ability to never forget where you came from. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay until the next story, because sometimes the smallest moments reveal the biggest truths about who we really are.